Are you truly aware of how the subtle nuances of movement and how they might be affecting your body? How we feed and move and notice the sensations in our bodies can pave the way for remarkable whole body wellness. Today, I have Lauren from Mind Body Vitality guiding us through an exploration of the pelvic floor. And she reveals how movement actually influences various parts of our body and the importance of nourishing ourselves, especially in this postpartum season. So join me as we dive into these essential insights and approach our health and well-being with renewed awareness and vitality. In our most sleep-deprived moments, our children will teach us exactly what we need in order to learn and grow into who we were created to be. These are the loving lessons we will learn whether we were wanting to or not. I'm Irene Gooch, your sleep coach, and I'm on mission to educate parents on how to help their young children sleep. Welcome to the journey. All right, welcome to Loving Lessons Learned podcast. I'm super excited to introduce you to my guest today. I have Lauren Mages with Mind and Body Vitality, and she is a movement and pelvic floor health specialist and wellness coach. She has over 10 years of Division I athletic training, sports medicine, physical therapy, and Pilates training under her belt. Don't mess with her. And she's completed her functional medicine health coaching certification also in 2022. Lauren believes in approaching physical health in an integrated way, remembering that lifestyle factors, emotional blocks, traumas, and movement pattern dysfunctions all play a role in the physical pain and symptoms. And Lauren really believes in guiding women and their families towards physical freedom and autonomy in order to thrive and be well. So Lauren, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love podcasts. I just got goosebumps as you're finishing reading them. Like, oh, we're in a good energetic space here.
Well, I was blessed to get to know you when we got to know each other with Lila when she was 6 months old. We did some sleep coaching work together.
Yes.
And then I was able to learn a little bit about the amazing work you do. And I think you know that the sleep principles that I share with families, we really talk about those wakeful windows. What do we do when our kids are not sleeping so that they can sleep well? And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what it means that you're trained as a movement and pelvic health specialist.
Yeah. So a lot of my movement background is not geared to pelvic health. It's whole body. It's musculoskeletal, neuromusculoskeletal work. But then as I progressed in my career and realized, wow, there are a lot of pelvic health issues that women experience that are considered normal. And I'm like, that's just not the case. And having my own child and experiencing my own pelvic health stuff, I was like, we need more access to this information for women. And so I dove even further into specific pelvic floor work, corrective exercises, etc. So I can still give women the tools to manage their whole body, but also knowing, look, if we subtly do this while you move or while we squat or whatever, you change this, how does that then feel in your pelvic floor? Oh, you don't feel the heaviness anymore? Oh, jumping feels okay. We're not worried about having a little urination into our pants. Great. Because of the specific pelvic health work that I've learned. So it's interesting because when you see someone who does pelvic health work, they usually have a background in whole movement first. The pelvic health stuff can get specific, but sometimes it's also just really simple shifts and tweaks that you make just in your overall movement patterns.
So you mentioned something about normal pelvic things. What would you say those that most people think are normal versus what might they need to have some awareness around?
That's a great question. Any kind of heaviness sensation, I wouldn't say that doctors say that that's normal, but I think sometimes it's talked about very casually, and it's something that we would want help with as a woman. We don't want to feel heavy and like we're going to lose an organ as we're walking with our children. Peeing the pants is a big one. A lot of women pee their pants a lot when they sneeze. I I've had women come in here before who say, I had a moment with my child, I got frustrated, and when I yelled, I peed all over the floor. You know, that's stuff that I think a lot of times you hear healthcare providers go, oh, that's so normal after you have kids. And it's like, normal and common are different things. Just because it's common doesn't mean that we should be doing that. Or if we have an option to not do that, maybe we want to look at that route. So I would say the incontinence issues are probably the biggest things where women are slightly gaslit, if not totally gaslit with that. Pain with sex, pain with bowel movements, like all of those things can be, and probably are, pelvic floor related too.
You know, it's interesting. I think recently I've been learning a whole lot more about the pelvic floor. I think I have still quite a bit to learn.
Me too.
I'm realizing like, wow, like nobody was talking about this. And my mom was actually on a cancer journey. And I think a lot of the issues she ended up having in that area were pelvic floor issues. She was needing to do some recovery work. But that was like literally at my newest stages of learning about this. How would someone know, like, do you feel like all women after they've delivered and given birth should be exploring pelvic floor support?
Oh yeah. 100%. Whether you have acute or longer lasting symptoms or not, your pelvic floor is always going to be influenced and affected by pregnancy. That is normal. What's not normal is not then taking the active steps while you're pregnant, honestly, but then initially postpartum to make sure, okay, my diaphragm and my rib cage are expanding and working nicely. My pelvic floor is able to withstand load. It's able to withstand jumping. It's able to withstand acceleration, decel, all these things that we do every day, whether you're athletically inclined or not. All of that stuff, I've just totally lost track of the question. Can you restate the question again?
No, it was just understanding like why somebody is going to like want to explore this.
Yes. Okay.
Given birth.
Yeah. Because you want to be able to move and not think about it. Right. So even women, even if you didn't have an issue with peeing yourself, feeling heaviness, getting up to pee multiple times during the night, whatever the case may be, I can guarantee you that every woman experiences some type of shoulder or low back pain if they're breastfeeding or bottle feeding their children, constantly having the child in one arm. Like all of that stuff is going to be connected to the pelvic floor in some way. The pelvic floor and pelvic floor issues aren't just isolated to the pelvic floor because everything is all connected. So if you are a woman who has given birth, especially, I shouldn't even say especially vaginally, because C-sections all have their own issues too. But if you've given birth, you absolutely need to be thinking about how all of this is going to impact my pelvic floor and the rest of my body moving forward, because it can show up in ways that you wouldn't think are pelvic floor related, but it in fact is.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I oftentimes will talk to parents, like if I'm observing them on a postpartum doula shift, like how they're feeding and whatnot. And I'll say, are you comfortable? And like that really takes your body away from just a place of rest if you're not comfortable and feeling supported. And so it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like these little nuances and shifts that we can make to improve our overall health and well-being.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a very tangible example I can give is I did breastfeed, and I have also had left shoulder blade discomfort ever since that time. And I'm not breastfed in way over a year now. But what's interesting about that is my left shoulder blade was bothering me because my rib cage was stiff on the left. And because my rib cage was stiff on the left, my pelvic floor on the left side of my pelvis was not able to work in tandem with my diaphragm. So yeah, it can get complicated, and it's complicated for me in terms of, I know how the whole body is connected, but then in terms of actually treating it, it can actually be very simple, because it could just be, well, we need to do some exercises where you can breathe into your left shoulder blade. And then actually by that effect, it goes down into your pelvic floor too, because everything is connected. So sometimes, and I know that you might ask this question in a little bit, because I think we discussed that you might, but that can also be the difference between seeing a pelvic health specialist in movement versus like a pelvic floor PT is looking at the whole body in that way as well.
So what would you say is the difference between?
Yeah. Well, legally, I cannot do internal exams. Only pelvic floor PTs can do internal exams, which sometimes is incredibly appropriate. I've referred people out before because I'm like, I really want to know what's going on actually in your body. And pelvic floor PTs do wonderful, wonderful work with internal manual work. But also a lot of times in my experience, and this is not every pelvic floor PT, but they're very focused on the pelvis. So if they're going to do the manual work, they're maybe going to have that actual biofeedback within your body while you do a Kegel or while you do an exercise to tell you, oh, yep, that's what you want to feel with that muscle, or that's the sensation you should feel when it's stretching. But it seems to be very concentrated at the pelvis. Whereas when I see someone, I'm focusing on, well, why is that happening down there in the first place? Because very rarely do pelvic floor symptoms only have stuff occurring at the pelvis. There's a whole system above and below. So I'm going, well, are your arches moving? Because how the arches are able to contract and relax is just like the pelvic floor diaphragm, which is also just like our rib cage diaphragm. And if all of that's not moving, or if your cranium can't expand because you're not breathing properly, that can affect the pelvic floor. So I think when you're working with someone who knows movement versus just, I shouldn't say just, but is very specifically working on therapeutic intervention, sometimes there's that disconnect between I'm just a pelvis versus I'm a whole human. And so that's why I think working in conjunction with pelvic floor PTs can be a beautiful symbiotic relationship, because they're going to be able to do things and feel into things that I legally and training educationally cannot do. But then I'm going to look at the whole body and go, oh, well, you know what, pelvic floor PT, I noticed this about their left foot or their left big toe or their whatever. And then you just work together within that. And that can be a really, really cool relationship to have. I love it when that happens.
Yeah. So Lauren, as you're saying that, like, I'm wondering, when you're working with someone, you work with them in person or virtually. So you're going to be able to assess virtually and see how their body is moving in that function, everything like head to toe. Is that correct? Am I understanding?
Yeah. Yes, that is correct. So I do have like a whole assessment that I'll go through with people when they first come in, very similar to like what a PT appointment would look like. But then as soon as I do my assessment work, okay, I'm like, great, that's one bit of information I have, but now let's move. And we get straight into moving. And then I go, oh, how interesting. I noticed this passive range of motion for you, but then when we do it actively, you actually are moving quite well there. So what's going on with that? And of course, this isn't something I'm necessarily openly discussing because that could be very overwhelming for someone, but that's what's going on in my brain is, ooh, okay, now I'm starting to put some pieces of the puzzle together here. Because assessment work is great. It gives us information, but it's not the whole kit and caboodle. I need to actually see how someone moves against gravity in various ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. The things that you're saying, my son, he worked with a PT. We were almost getting ready to go into surgery. And it turns out like his hips are just misaligned.
Well, it happens all the time.
It was something so interesting and fascinating. It was like a 1.5 year journey going to all the doctors and trying to figure that out. And so I'm wondering if you can dive into a little bit about the functional medicine portion, the functional health portion of what you do, because I think that's something that has helped me understand asking more questions, getting curious and understanding body experience out.
Yeah. So we know that physical pain, yes, there could be an actual like musculoskeletal or neuromusculoskeletal reason for that pain. And we need to also just look at various lifestyle factors. So the thing I love about functional medicine versus the traditional Western medicine approach is that we're going to look at stress. We're going to look at circadian rhythm. We're going to look at specific tests that unfortunately aren't covered by insurance. We're going to look at food. Do you have an allergy? Well, if you have an allergy, where is that actually coming from? And how can we eventually get you to be able to eat those foods again? And then how does all of that, once we start taking bit by bit of things, how does that then affect what you feel physically? And So without wanting to go to med school, because I had never had any desire to do that, I was like, I have been through enough school. I am not, no, we are not doing that. I decided to go through the functional medicine health coaching. It's called FMCA, Functional Medicine Coaching Academy. And I did that actually while I was pregnant. It was a year-long program where I learned how to coach people who are working with functional medicine providers. So basically, while I can't order tests or do any of the diagnostic work that a functional medicine practitioner is going to do, I at least know the lingo and I can help educate people on those things. So if I have someone who comes in here, whether they're seeing a functional medicine provider or not, maybe they say, I've just really noticed every time I drink 2% milk, like it really gives me like indigestion issues. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, let's just talk about the process of dairy and what pasteurization looks like, and what would it feel like to maybe take milk out for a while, and then what would it feel like to add it back in eventually? Will we see the same issues? I don't know. Could it be that the milk is keeping you from having regular bowel movements, and is that affecting your low back pain? It literally, like, there's so many different examples that I could just randomly spit off, but it's all connected. And if we're only looking at the body as this one thing, like, well, my body has pain. Okay, well, let's treat the pain based on physical movement. Or, okay, let's treat the pain based on this one, I don't know, medical diagnosis you have. Then you're missing so many other things that are probably at play here. And then that's when it's like working with a hungry ghost. I'm reaching for something, right? Versus like, what is the root cause? And I know that's like such an overused phrase now. It kind of drives me nuts, but it is what it is. Like, we're looking for like the one or two things where it's like, what's actually holding all of this together? And so that's part of why I went for something in functional medicine, because I was like, I need to legally be able to talk about this. Because I had all kinds of knowledge and information, but I was like, legally, I should not be saying any of this to anybody. So I went and got that done, and I'm so glad I did it that way too, because honestly, it gave me a lot of also really good information on how to work better with people and from a psychological standpoint as well.
Well, I think, Lauren, part of my heart and passion for this whole podcast series with like talking to different practitioners is like seeing the wealth of knowledge that people have in terms of like recognizing like it's not just one thing. Like a lot of times when people come to me for sleep, they're like, okay, we're going to talk about sleep. And I'm like, let's look at how you're eating. Let's look at what's happening in those wakeful windows and all that stuff. And they're like, what? We were just going to talk about sleep.
Well, how are you connecting with your child when they're awake, Lauren? What do you mean? I remember that question.
So all those things, right? Like we can't, I think for me, it's been hard to like separate it. And like Western medicine, like our medical system seems to kind of want to say like, nope, just this one thing. This is what I specialize in. And I think that there is a place for that.
Sure.
But I also think that there's something to having providers and specialists like you who can look at the whole big picture.
Yeah.
How all of that plays into it.
And having another network of providers that you can refer someone to if you don't know the answers, or if you can only work on this one specific aspect, but they need a little something extra. Like it's so cool to meet other people who have all these different disciplines and all these different knowledge. And you go, well, this client of mine has a very specific personality or belief system, whatever. So I'm going to direct them here. Well, this client seems to have more of this kind of personality. This would be a great provider to put them with because they have like a super unique bedside manner, like it. And it's so nice to have all those people because it also depends on the person you're working with too.
It's true too.
Yeah.
Personalities for sure.
Yeah.
So, Lauren, one of the other things that I really loved learning about what you do is you share some like recipes and how you're taking care of your body through nutrition. What does that look like in your practice?
So that's one of the tricky things when it comes to being a functional medicine health coach versus like a functional medicine provider or a registered dietitian or nutritionist. Like, I don't do meal plans for people. That's legally something I cannot do. However, I do love educating people on what nutrient dense foods actually look like, how to grocery shop, how to read a food label so they have the autonomy to be able to like feel confident when they go to the grocery store and then make the meal that is nutrient dense and also tastes good. So a lot of it goes back to just me educating people on what seems very basic. Unfortunately, it's not basic anymore. We're so far removed from basic things when it comes to nutrition and cooking and, but yes, like I do have some recipes that I will give to people that I'm like, this is one that I love personally. Try this one at home. And guess what? Here's how you could change it and you can tweak it. But I also just love teaching people like, what does your plate usually look like? And if you want to know more about different colors and what different phytonutrients are all in these things, great, we can talk about that too. So it's a lot of education that I can choose to really dive in with someone if they're interested, or we can keep it more basic, but just give them that feeling of like, I have control and I have power because I have knowledge over what I put into my body and what I'm able to buy at a grocery store, which can be just a very stressful and misleading experience for people because marketing is really good, really good.
So Lauren, you mentioned nutrient dense foods. Why is that going to be important for someone recovering postpartum?
Oh my God, because we give everything to those babies. One, we're all nutrient depleted anyway, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but especially if you are a woman who's been on birth control for years, which a lot of us, I was, your nutrients is depleted. We have so much research that supports that and backs that up. And I'd be happy if anyone ever wants to reach out on Instagram, I'd be happy to send some resources your way. So we start out a little nutrient depleted, and then we grow this child, and they have to take everything from us because they need it in order to grow and to survive outside of the womb. So then it's up to us to try to put those nutrients back into our bodies. And the best way to do that is with food, with sunlight. And then now there's all this research and a lot of trending stuff with electrolyte usage and water, like having clean water that still has minerals in it. And gosh, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. But the point is, like, we have to be able to replenish our bodies because those kids have to take everything from us in order to live. And if we're already kind of starting a little lower and then we're really in the tank after having a child, it just becomes that much more important to go, like, I have to prioritize this. I have to, because we see all these postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, and those are so nuanced issues. So I'm not saying this is all from nutrient depletion, but when we are nutrient depleted, and we've got hormone surges, and we've maybe got inflammation that affects our brains, that affects how our body communicates to our gut. It affects everything. So not sleeping. Yes. Oh my gosh. Duh. Not sleeping.
All the things. Yes.
If you're breastfeeding, you're continuing to give nutrients. Like it's so crucial to, I can't stress it enough. Like yeah, we have to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like that's one of the newest things that I've been hearing about, like the nutrient piece, because I think too, like trying to even help families have more beneficial meals delivered to them in that postpartum, season.
Yeah.
Just thinking about like, could someone like cut and chop some fresh food that might be helpful for mamas? I always recommend that.
Yes.
Again, it's really hard to do some of that when you're taking care of yourself from recovery from birth and also taking care of that baby.
Yeah.
Just being able to be loved on and supported in that way can make a huge difference.
Totally. And I mean, this is why I stress with some of my clients that are prenatal, I'm like, you need to food prep. I'm like, I know it's annoying for some people to do it. I'm like, but it is a must, especially if you don't have family or community around you, people who are just going to bring you food. I'm like, you have to do it for yourself. And there's so many ways you can do it that aren't tedious and just like totally like time heavy, but yeah, like setting up a whole meal service I wish we could do that for mothers, because the thing is, like, first and foremost, a woman needs to eat. I know I went through times in the newborn stage where I would go hours without eating, and then I was an emotional mess by the time my husband would get home because I hadn't eaten. So first and foremost, we have to eat. But if we can add another layer onto that, then we need to be looking at the quality of the food that we're eating. Because if you're already nutrient depleted, you've got these hormone surges, your gut's probably going to be off, especially if you had medical interventions at the hospital. And then you're feeding your body foods that cause inflammation. That inflammation is going to travel up to your brain. And then your brain being inflamed causes more emotional issues. So you want to, again, going off of postpartum anxiety and depression, just postpartum mood disorders, we need to be looking at food because that's going to play a huge role in all of that. It's all connected.
Yeah, food is medicine. So, okay, I'm wondering if you can help me help my families that I support. I usually suggest for postpartum families to have someone prep meals for you. What are some of the foods that they should maybe put on that list? Like, I was thinking, is there like a top 5 or 10 foods that you might say, try to incorporate these into your daily eating?
Yeah.
I would like to know what those should be.
Yeah. So actually, the first resource I want to point out is this book called The First 40 Days. It's a book that I bought and did a lot of my food prepping based on. It's a fantastic book. It's actually, I'm not even going to be able to remember anymore because it's been 2 whole years, over 2 years now since I've read it. But she even has like a whole like pantry list of foods, fresh produce foods, meats, like it, she breaks it down so beautifully. But really it just goes back to, well, I guess it depends on how you want to look at it. You could break it down in your head like that of like, these are items I'm always going to have in my pantry. So like specific types of nuts, especially Brazil nuts for women, because if you have one Brazil nut a day, that gives your entire level of selenium that you need for the day. I'm going to have nuts on hand. I'm going to have certain types of beans. I'm going to have gluten-free, better ingredient pastas, like Jovial is my favorite brand. Don't get Banza. They literally just found huge glyphosate levels in Banza pasta, so don't buy them anymore. But Jovial is a really good brand. Okay. But then also like color. You need color, so you need vegetables, you need fruits, high quality proteins. You know, if you're vegan or pescatarian or whatever, that's a little different. Then I recommend really working with somebody because you do need to have lots of protein when you're postpartum. But all of that stuff is pretty, that's pretty standard. But some of the other things, because, that's all well and good. But then we go, okay, how am I going to cook that? My husband just got home from work, or my partner, they don't have a lot of time off, and I've got this baby all day, and I'm anxious, and I don't have time to cook. Okay, great. So why don't we just put together, specific like cheese platter plate. So I'm going to have specific cheeses with specific types of nuts and crackers. And maybe I'll just have like, some better, like a salami, a prosciutto or whatever that I can just,
board.
Yes, that you can literally just snack on for lunch. And then for dinner, maybe you make a casserole that, is going to last several days. And this is actually a recipe that I give to a lot of people. It's so easy, but it's literally just Jovial noodles, ground beef, which again, ground beef comes in many different forms. You want to get the better stuff and you are going to pay for it, but it's so worth it. Ground beef, you get buffalo mozzarella, you get pecorino romano, which is a goat cheese. It tastes a lot like cajita cheese or cajita. I don't even know how to say that, but it's got like a little bit of a bite to it. And then you chop up a bunch of kale and you put it in there, you stir it up with some pasta sauce and you stick it in the oven. And that literally will last you for days. If you can just have someone come to your house to make it for you, or someone comes to your house and holds the baby, or the baby's sleeping and you make it, and then you've got a meal prepped. I love crock-pot and casserole meals for postpartum. I think that's always the easiest way to go if you don't have someone who can cook for you and bring you food.
Lauren, we're going to include that recipe in the blog post. So anyone listening to this podcast, you'll want to check out Lauren's blog post so you can see the recipe she shared, so you can have access to that quick, free, easy little recipe that's going to nourish your body in a great way. Yeah, I still make it every week. I also think it's interesting. You talked about the first 40 days. One of my other guests, Stephanie Gleason, she's a postpartum doula, and she recommended that book. So good. I'm like, I need to definitely put that on my favorite things. Yeah, it's so good. She has that. Yeah, she's got bone broth recipes in there. And it's based off of Eastern medicine. So the author's grandmother, I believe, was an Eastern medicine practitioner. So that's where she learned a lot of the stuff from, but it's all based on Eastern medicine traditions of the first 40 days.
how you treat your body, it's interesting because they always say, I guess in her culture, you stay inside with your child. You don't expose them to wind, to sun, like you just stay in with them. You completely nest for 40 days, which we just don't do that here in America. And that is totally fine. But her nutrition information is fantastic. And then she also just had like random sections where she talks about like the realness of the difficulties of some of the newborn stage, but she does it in a way that's not negative. Cause for moms now, I feel like you either hear stuff and you're like, that's so negative, I have to tune it out because it's venting, versus this is the reality of the newborn phase. It's hard and beautiful, but here's the reality. So have conversations around these things with your partner so that maybe the reality doesn't have to feel so jarring sometimes. And I think she illustrates that really well too.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I buy that resource for myself. Thank you
do.
for sharing that.
Of course.
Lauren, if someone is looking to get connected with you, how can they work with you?
Yeah. So I do a lot of one-on-one movement as I'm in my studio. One-on-one movement sessions. I do virtual health coaching. And then I also from time to time will just have like random group classes. So if someone's like, I'm interested in working with you, but I kind of want to get a vibe of you first, sometimes people will just come to my group classes. But that's really the main way at this point in time how I am working with people. And if they're interested in contacting me, they just have to literally go to my website contact page, type in a message, and I literally will respond within 24 hours because I am anal and I never leave people hanging long.
Great. And do you have something you'll share with them if they reach out to you?
Yeah. So actually, if people reach out to me, interested in working with me or whatever the case may be, I will send you part of my integrative postpartum guide, which is full of recipes, facts about phytonutrients for postpartum. It's got pelvic floor exercises in it for prenatal and postpartum. It's got a whole mindset section with journaling. What's the word I'm looking for? Journaling prompts, different ways of breathing techniques, all kinds of things. I will send you one sheet that has a recipe on it, or if you would rather have like a nutrition fact sheet, I'll send you that. And then I'll also send you a pelvic floor exercise. And if there is a particular issue someone is having, whether they're pregnant or they're postpartum, you let me know and I'll send you an exercise that might fit your bill a little bit more based on what you're experiencing.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share a link to that so that they can get connected and, figure out what they might need. And you are definitely a wealth of information and a great resource to get connected with.
And still learning. So stay tuned.
I love your learning lifestyle. I feel like a lot, I felt like when we worked together, it was just beautiful to see how you embrace the process and you were learning and growing. And I still see how you are learning and growing as a practitioner and as a mom and all around. So it's really cool to witness.
Thank you. I really appreciate that affirmation.
Love it. Well, again, we could probably talk all day, but I want to wrap up with our top 5 loving lessons learned.
Okay.
Today. So I'm wondering if you have a favorite parenting product or service.
Yeah, you. I'm not even joking. I'm not kidding. I don't pay attention. The newborn phase, that was different, but now that I've got a toddler, it's just a matter of like, sleep has always been my kryptonite. It's my thing that I stress about. And I was very, and you know this, like I'm very anti-traditional sleep training. So finding you was a godsend. And this is why I've also worked with you like 2 or 3 times now, because every time her sleep changes, I have a moment of panic, but we've worked together enough now to where I'm like, it's okay. What would Irene say? This is what Irene would say. This is what I'm going to do. So honestly, you've been my favorite. I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast. That is the truth. I tell you to everybody that talks about sleep with their babies.
Thank you so much. I love you, Lauren. I love hearing that just because it warms my heart. Like, I just know like when we first met to where you're at now, like, and I'm just going to throw out there, like, I got to
Please.
see a reel with Lauren, and she was nap trapped and she was embracing it and loving it.
Mhm.
She's understanding that it's this whole learning and growing process. So
Yes.
so cool to witness. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right. And so what is your best self-care tip?
My best self-care tip, I think would be, I have so many. What feels potent to me right now with the time of motherhood that I'm in is I know that there's only a certain amount of time that I have each day to myself. And there are all these things that I do love doing for myself. However, if I sit silently long enough to know what my body, not my brain, what my body is asking for, that's when I feel like I utilize my self-care time so much better. So it's not a, well, I should work out. Well, I should do a magnesium foot soak. It's like, no, screw all that. I mean, yes, that's important, but like, what do you feel like you need? And the second I do that, whether it's been 5 minutes or 2 hours during nap time, I feel so much more replenished because I've done what my body needs in that moment.
And I'm assuming when people work with you, they'll learn how to figure that out.
Yes, we will talk about that quite a bit if needed, and if I don't get pushed back.
Sometimes we have to come open minds, open hearts. And so is there something that you never thought you would do or say as a parent?
So I think that's going to be a great question every 5 years when it comes to the smartphone issue, because I am very anti-smartphone for kids. So check back in with me in 5 years because I'm saying no way. If I had to choose anything, I think it would be introducing TV time before the age of 2, because I was dead set on not doing it. And then this past spring, Lila had a sleep regression, which I reached out to you about, and then got 2 ear infections back to back. So it was a really rough few weeks there because my child does not transition in and out of any of that quickly at all. And there were some Saturday mornings where my husband and I were like, we just need to survive today. So you know what? We're going to put on Moana and it's going to be fun. She is not going to be a bad kid. We're not going to screw up her brain or her development because we put on a movie so that you and I can have a moment of relaxing on the couch after being up and down all night long.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what is one thing that you want all parents to know after our conversation today? What's the one thing you?
This was the toughest question. Two things, and I have to say the second one because of what the first one is. I think that we need to understand as parents that from years 0 to 7 is when any child psychologist, anyone who works in research space would say that is the most formative years of a child's life. That's when they start really understanding the world around them, how they operate in it, etc. That's their programming. That's stuff that's not easily changed. So as a parent, we need to keep in mind that our children, first and foremost, need to feel safe and secure. They need to feel like they can have emotions, not behaviors with emotions in some ways, but understand that it's okay to feel what they're feeling. And then we need to make them feel confident about themselves and about the world that surrounds them. And the way that we do that best is if this is kind of my second point, we take care of ourselves. Because if the mom is the foundation of the house, or whatever primary parent, whatever your gender role is, or whatever gender is, we are the foundation of the house. If we are empty, all of that other stuff falls apart. Then the child's not going to feel safe. The child's not going to feel like they can be creative because mommy just got frustrated with them drawing on the walls and then they screamed at the child, whatever the case may be. So we have to fill our cup first. And we have to also realize that we're going to screw up because we're not perfect. We're not perfect. And that is okay. Our children need to see imperfections as well. But I really think that's like my biggest thing, because that's also the biggest lesson that I've had to learn. Are just those things. I have to take care of me. It's not selfish to do that, because when I take care of me, then I can remind myself, My toddler is getting very frustrated right now. And you know what? I have spent almost zero one-on-one time with her. Okay, maybe she's not feeling safe. Maybe she's not feeling seen. Maybe she's not feeling confident in a new skill she's trying to, whatever. I don't know what the case may be. But like you have to have those moments for yourself in order to then see the bigger picture so that those first 7 years are taken care of as well as possible, so that their development later on hopefully is just so much easier. And granted, again, TBD for me, I've only got a 2-year-old, but there's been a lot of mirroring from her about things that I have to work on based on what triggers me with her. And with all of the studying I'm doing right now on energetic work and the chakra system, all these things that are very real, very measurable things, I'm like, parents need to understand this stuff better. But in order to do that, we have to be available for our children first. And in order to be available for our children, we have to go back. We have to focus on ourselves at least a little bit.
Yeah, I would say a lot of it.
Yeah. A
Because
lot of it.
I usually say, like, our children will do what we do, not what we say. Like, it's really hard to see that lesson.
Oh, that's the hardest part of parenting. That's the hardest part, because children are mirror neurons. So everything that they see, they're reflecting back to us. So when they're dysregulated, you have to stop for a second and go, how did I walk into their room this morning and get them up from their crib? Was I okay? Because chances are you probably weren't, and they were feeling into that, right? So it's tough.
We could have a whole other podcast about this.
Yes,
I love
that. It's a whole other thing.
I do talk about mirror neurons and all. One last question before we hop off is, what have you learned in your business journey as an entrepreneur?
Oh, gosh.
What's your one key thing?
I think right now, I would say my biggest thing, honestly, is I am much more concerned with being very good and very attentive with the people I'm seeing versus worrying about seeing as many people as I can to help as many people as I can, because that is so draining, especially working in healthcare, so physically close with people. And like, I touch people all the time. So there's a constant exchange of energy when I'm doing that. And if I have someone in my room that I'm touching who is in physical pain, my body can take that on. Can be very tiring. So I'm at a point now as a business owner where I'm like, I would so much rather only see a couple people at once and be able to really give them that time and space. And then that doesn't deplete me, so that I can then go be the mom and the wife that I expect of myself. Versus when I was younger and I was very ego driven, I was like, I'm going to help everybody. But then that does not work. I'm sorry. That is not a thing. That does not work.
Yeah, I love that. That's such good wisdom, because again, sometimes the world says one thing, and when we realize like what we really need for ourselves, that's a whole different.
Well, what I always like to think of too is like the ripple effect is real. So even if you only have one client a week that you're working with, if you can really help support that one person and however they need support, and if they're feeling better, think of what that does through the rest of their lives, right? Like all the people in their inner circle. And that touches way more people than you helping a bunch of people. And everyone's like, well, this is half-assed, excuse my language. So yeah, it was a harsh reality to learn at first, because my perception of it now is very different with my perception of it even just a few years ago. But yeah, it's just like, quality over quantity. It just goes back to that basic thing.
Love it.
Yeah.
Lauren, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you, and I will look forward to hopefully connecting with you again here.
Yes.
Because I think I'd love to dive in talking a little bit more about Lila and sleep in your motherhood journey.
Let's do it.
Phytonutrients and all the other good things that you dropped in this show today. So thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into today's show. You can see all of the details and show notes below. And as you go out into your day, I hope that you'll make it your mission to be calm, confident, and rested as you lead today. Sweet dreams.